World Regions Geography, Lecture 3, Part 3. Rise of the Russian Empire. The Soviet Union was in crisis by 1980. Its failure to deliver consumer goods was one of the key factors in its collapse. Population was becoming informed about consumerism. And because it was a police state, it was built on regional inequalities. The U.S., Ronald Reagan, had an economic arms race, which caused an economic drain, which eventually bankrupted the country. And another big factor is the inflexibility and lack of computer technology. And this goes back to the police state mentality that existed in the Soviet Union. They were very afraid of things like fax machines, copy machines, that type of technology. And computer technology they saw as a way that subversives, outsiders could have access to the population and cause dissent. So they didn't really do much in the way of computer technology, and certainly not in terms of computer technology, or even in business. So they fell quite a ways behind technologically. Between 1989 and 1991, the Soviet Union broke apart into 15 different states. There was a complete social collapse of the system. Shift to capitalism after 70 years of central planning has been problematic. There's the rise of the mafias, the organized crime groups, the Russian mafias, the oligarchs, and these are the wealthy, politically and economically connected individuals, a lot of former Soviet officials who bought state-owned industries and control things like oil, timber, uh, different technologies. That's the oligarchs. Economic growth was dramatic between 2000 and 2014. But at the end of 2013, Russia was the 9th largest economy in the world. Now, what has happened, one of the things that fueled this economic growth was the tremendous value of oil. But two things have happened since then, and that is the Russians invaded Crimea, which is right there. Yeah, right there, and took that from the Ukraine, and that created where the Western Europe and the U.S. had an embargo against the Russians, and then collapsing commodities prices, primarily in oil and natural gas, have devastated the Russian economy, and the Russian economy is close to collapse a second time. The central region, centered on Moscow, is about 85% urban, a major contributor to the Russian Federation production. A lot of businesses, a lot of manufacturing are all located in this region. Regions of decreasing prosperity are the regions of territorial conflict. In other words, Central Asian regions, the regions that border on former Eastern Europe, resource poor regions such as Siberia. Siberia has a lot of resources, a lot of mineral wealth, but it's very hard to extract, and that's partly because of roads and partly because of weather and terrain. There's 27 million non-Russians in the Soviet Union, or in Russia, Russia and Central Asia. Chechen independence movement, Sunni Muslims. The Soviets have crushed the Chechens before. You have this ongoing civil war. Chechnya declared its independence in 89, and the Russians invaded in 94 and have been battling for this region ever since. The Transcaucasus and Central Asia. ethno-nationalism. There's Armenian citizens in Azerbaijan. Civil war, there's a big oil pipeline there. There's continual fighting over this. South Ossetia, which is the Georgia region. Again, that's down by the Black and Caspian Sea. Tajikistan and Uzbekistan in the Fergan Valley. These are all areas of contention with various ethnic groups, and it's not settled. It will probably end up being another Middle East type region in terms of ongoing civil war. Geopolitical shifts. The Commonwealth of Independent States, which are basically the former Soviet states, the 15 states that broke away. They're in the Commonwealth of Independent States. Near abroad, Russia's expanding political influence. Russia right now is trying to expand its political influence in two regions, into the polar region by creating a polar navy, and also into the Middle East with bases now in Iran and in Syria. The growth of civil society has been significant in Russia since the collapse of the Soviet system. The one thing about the Soviet system, because everything was provided by the state, there wasn't this civil society. In other words, you didn't have anything, nonprofits that provided housing and food and medical and job training, things like that we take for granted in our country. That did not exist. And BRICS, those are Brazil, Russia, India, and China. It's a group of countries that were booming economies. Some of which are not now, like Russia and Brazil. Religion and language. The main religion is Eastern Orthodoxy, Russian Orthodox, and it's in Russia and Georgia. Islam is Azerbaijan and the Central Asian. Language is Slavonic, so Slavic, and Turkic. Turkic is in this region here, and Paleo-Siberian, this region, and Caucasian down in this region, and the Slavics up in this region and through here. The high culture, influenced by European art, classic music, ballet, novels. The Russians are known for ballet, their classic music. Largely came from the time of Peter the Great and Catherine the Great, who really connected Russia, which was kind of an eastern facing, to the West. And so that's when ballet was brought in, and classic music, and opening of St. Petersburg. It's more of a Western focus, a European focus on the culture instead of an Asian focus. Popular culture was influenced by the Soviet era, and it's influenced by the West. Gender and identity in the Soviet era. So gender and identity in the Soviet era, the Soviets, women were treated very, very well. They had child care, they had medical, they had a lot of benefits. They were encouraged to take roles in the military, and not only in service part of the military, but in combat. They were encouraged to be construction workers, to do all types of labor. Everything was open, and they were guaranteed equal pay. Since the collapse of the Soviets, it's opened new opportunities. There's opportunities to get in business. There's opportunities to be a part of the market economy, but they have also lost some of the benefits, so like a guaranteed child care, health care, equal pay, and political representation. So they've lost some things, they've won some things, and it is probably, I don't know, maybe as good. Legally off-limit jobs. Wage disparities now, just like everywhere else, women are paid less. Not that they earn less, but they're paid less. And regressed political representation. And what that means is they no longer have as much political clout as they had during the Soviet system. Demography and urbanization, low population density. Russia as a whole, very few people, large areas virtually unpopulated. Higher urbanization, if you look at it, warmer regions, oil regions, Moscow, right there. Population growth and decline, slow growing population in the European portion of Russia. High birth rates, Central Asia. So the population is shifting from here towards here. Rising mortality rate among men, probably because of high alcohol consumption. But yeah, the Soviet birth rate is declining, and demographics say that there will be probably as much as 10 to 15% less people in Russia by 2050 than there are today, which is going to have some severe potential impacts because of the neighbors and the likelihood of expansion into these regions by neighboring groups, and the growth of the Muslim population because they're still having a high birth rate. Energy dependency. Russia is dependent on energy production for its economy. It is not a mono economy, but it is an economy that is strongly based on energy production. And so when energy prices are down, like the price of oil and natural gas are right now, the country suffers economically. Democracy and plutocracy. The elites, Russia is what we kind of call a kleptocracy, which is the elites are pretty corrupt. People do get to vote, but there are a group of elites that run it, and they're fairly corrupt, and there will probably be changes there, but the Russian people seem to like that system. The Far East economic boom, that's going well for them, but we don't know how long that's going to go on, and what the impact is going to be with China. A demographic implosion. You have an aging population, and you have an extremely low birth rate, and the combination of that in the next 20 to 30 years is going to be a collapsing population. And when that happens, you have a collapsing economy because consumption dries up.